The final sound I heard was my son planning my murder. I used to think death would be silent, a peaceful slipping away. I was wrong. My death was announced in a whisper, a secret shared with the sterile, cold air of a hospital room. The final sound I was meant to hear wasn't a fond memory or a prayer, but the voice of my firstborn son, Daniel, calmly detailing the timeline of my murder while he deliberately suffocated me. This is the story of how the child I raised became my executioner, and how the legacy I built with a lifetime of labor was almost destroyed in 12 minutes of chilling betrayal. My name is Robert Miller. For 67 years, I was a builder. I built Miller Precision Manufacturing from a dusty garage, a dream, and a second-hand lathe into a company that employed over 100 people in my hometown. I built a 42-year marriage with Margaret, my cornerstone, my confidant, the woman whose laughter could still make my old heart skip a beat. And I built a family. Our daughter Sarah was our wildfire, fiercely intelligent, independent, and driven. She carved her own path straight through medical school to become a renowned pulmonologist in Seattle. Her Sunday calls were the highlight of our week, a connection that never wavered, never asked for anything but our love. Then there was Daniel, my boy, the heir apparent. At 41, he was still, in the kindest terms, figuring things out. In blunter terms, he was adrift, carried by the current of the privilege his mother and I had provided. He'd floated through marketing, sales, and operations at the company, leaving a trail of half-finished projects and disgruntled employees in his wake. I had installed him as Vice President of Business Development, a title I invented hoping it would spark a sense of purpose. Instead, it became a hollow crown. He spent more time lunching with investors and less time understanding the nuts and bolts of the business that paid for those lunches. I saw the flashes of resentment in his eyes when I questioned his expenses, the impatience when I talked about long-term strategy. I dismissed it as the frustration of a son living in his father's shadow. I was a fool, blinded by a father's hope. The crisis began with a cough that wouldn't quit, a tightness in my chest that grew until I was gasping for air in my own living room. The diagnosis was a severe respiratory infection, and the prognosis was simple: continuous oxygen therapy or potential organ failure. The hospital room became my world, a sterile bubble where the hiss of the oxygen tube was the soundtrack of my survival. It was in this state of profound vulnerability that the mask began to slip. Daniel and his wife, Lisa, became my constant visitors. At first, their attention was a comfort. They brought magazines, talked about the news, and seemed genuinely concerned. But the shift was subtle, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. "Dad, you need to conserve your strength," Daniel would say, his voice a syrupy imitation of concern. "Let me handle things. Just tell me where the digital copies of the partnership agreements are stored. The Henderson account is getting antsy." Lisa, a woman whose beauty was as sharp and cold as a diamond, would hover. "And the security codes for the office, Robert? We had a small alarm glitch yesterday. It would be a shame if the police were called unnecessarily while you're here." Their questions were a carefully laid trap, baited with practicality. They asked about my will, about the power of attorney documents, about the location of a spare key to the floor, safe at home. Margaret's anxiety was a live wire in the room. Her hands would flutter nervously when they were near, and she started finding excuses to stay by my side, a silent, worried sentinel. Meanwhile, Sarah's calls from Seattle were a dose of clear-headed reality. "Dad, your oxygen saturation levels are borderline. I've spoken to your doctor. I'm booking a flight for tomorrow." There was no agenda in her voice, only the sharp professional concern of a doctor and the deep love of a daughter. The dichotomy was heartbreaking. My daughter, 1,000 miles away, fighting for my life, while my son, at my bedside, was slowly positioning himself to inherit it. The fourth night was when the pretense fell away completely. The room was bathed in the dim, nocturnal glow of medical equipment. The morphine drip kept the edge off the pain, but left my mind floating, aware yet detached. Around 3 a.m., the soft hiss of the door opening cut through the haze. I kept my eyes shut, playing possum. A figure moved into the room with a silence that was alien to Daniel's usual clumsy gait. This was a different man. Purposeful, calculated, calculated. He stood over me, his shadow swallowing the light from the monitor. I could feel his gaze, not of a son looking at his father, but of a scavenger assessing a carcass. His hands, which had never shown much aptitude for anything mechanical, went to the oxygen apparatus with a terrifying, practiced efficiency. He followed the clear plastic tube from the wall outlet to the cannula nestled in my nostrils. Then, with a deliberate, cold-blooded finality, he pinched the connector and pulled. The life-giving hiss stopped. An immediate, visceral panic seized my chest. My lungs, already weakened, screamed for air. I fought every instinct to thrash, to gasp, to cry out. I forced myself to remain a statue, to listen to the monster my son had become. He leaned down, so close I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. His whisper was a serpent's kiss, a sound that will haunt me for whatever days I have left. Time to close your eyes forever, old man. In that moment, the last vestiges of my paternal love for him evaporated. He was no longer my son. He thought the drugs had claimed me. Lisa said you'd be a fighter, he muttered, a note of petulant annoyance in his tone. She said you'd cling to life out of sheer spite. We've waited for years for you to just retire, to hand it over. But you just kept holding on, tightening your grip. And then he started talking. It was a confession, a soliloquy of greed. He laid out their entire sordid scheme. The massive debts, not from bad business, but from a secret gambling addiction and a series of reckless, speculative investments with a private lending group that was more mafia than bank. Lisa, it turned out, came from a family well acquainted with financial ruin and had masterminded the plan. "The VIG is killing us, Dad," he said, as if I were an understanding business partner. "The interest alone is more than my salary. We use the business as collateral. They're not patient men." He talked about the forgeries. Lisa had a talent for mimicry and had perfected my signature on loan documents and a preliminary sales agreement for our cherished lakeside cabin. He detailed how they would liquidate the company, pay off the debts, and still have millions left to start a new life far away, unburdened by the shadow of my legacy. Then the cruelest cut. "Sarah will be upset, of course," he said, his voice dripping with a long-held jealousy. "But she has her own life, her own career. She'll get over it. She always does. By the time she flies in, it will be a done deal. A tragic complication. No one will question it." For 12 agonizing minutes, I lay there, trapped in a torture chamber of my own making. My body was a battleground, my will to live fighting against the crushing need to breathe. Stars exploded behind my eyelids. A terrifying numbness began to creep into my limbs. I was minutes from death, forced to listen to the obituary written by my killer. Salvation came in the form of sturdy, rubber-soled shoes. The unmistakable, confident footsteps of Helen, the night charge nurse, echoed down the hallway. Daniel heard them too. In a frantic, clumsy scramble, he fumbled with the tubing, his hands trembling so violently he could barely reconnect it. The moment the hiss returned, I drew a slow, silent, shuddering breath, praying he wouldn't notice the slight movement of my chest. The door opened. Helen stood there, a clipboard in hand, her eyes missing nothing. "Mr. Daniel," she said, her voice a neutral, professional instrument. "Visiting hours ended at 8 p.m. Your father needs his rest to recover." I know. I'm sorry," Daniel stammered, wiping his palms on his pants. I thought I heard a noise. The oxygen line, it seemed loose. I was just checking it." Helen's gaze was a laser. It swept from Daniel's sweating face to the slightly askew tubing, to my feigned peaceful expression. "Is that so?" she replied, her tone flat. "That's unusual. I did my full rounds at 1:30 a.m. All systems were optimal." She didn't wait for his reply. She stepped forward, her movements efficient and sure, and checked the connection herself, making a show of ensuring it was secure. She then picked up my chart and made a detailed, time-stated note. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a witness, and she was building a case. After Daniel slunk away with a mumbled apology, Helen finished her checks. As she turned to leave, I opened my eyes and caught her gaze. I motioned her closer. "Helen," I whispered, the sound scraping against my raw throat. "I need my phone. I need to call my lawyer. It's a matter of life and death." And she didn't flinch. She didn't ask for an explanation. She simply nodded, a look of grim understanding in her eyes. She retrieved my phone from the drawer, placed it in my hand, and said, "I'll be right outside. You will not be disturbed." At 4:30 a.m., my oldest friend and legal counsel, Richard Stein, walked into my room. Helen had personally escorted him. One look at my face and his usual jovial demeanor vanished, replaced by the sharp focus of a seasoned attorney who knew a crisis when he saw one. I told him everything. The disconnected tube, the whispered confession, the debts, the forgeries, the plot against Sarah, the 12 minutes of hell. Richard listened without interruption, his face a granite mask of growing horror and fury. "Robert," he said when I finished, his voice low and steady, "what you're describing is premeditated attempted murder. But we cannot act rashly. If we go to the police now with just your word, it becomes a he said scenario, a grieving, medicated father against his concerned son. We need irrefutable evidence. We need to secure your assets immediately before they suspect anything." With Helen standing guard at the door, we got to work. On a laptop Richard had brought, we drafted a new last will and testament. It was explicit, brutal, and left no room for interpretation. It revoked all prior wills, named Sarah as the sole executor and beneficiary of my entire estate, and specifically disinherited Daniel for reasons of undue influence, fraud, and actions taken against my person. We signed it then and there, with Richard acting as notary. Next, I called Margaret. It was the most difficult conversation of our long life together. "Peg, my love, I need you to be strong and listen very carefully," I began, my voice trembling. "Do not let Daniel or Lisa into the house under any circumstances. Tell them you're sick. Go to my office. Look in the filing cabinet behind the desk, the fireproof one. Look for any documents with Daniel's signature. Anything related to loans, liens, or property sales. I believe he's been forging my name." What she discovered over the next few hours was a devastation that cut deeper than any illness. She found not just a few forged documents, but a paper trail of systematic betrayal. There were loan applications from 3 different shady lenders, all with my forged signature, totaling over $2 million. There were liens filed against the main manufacturing plant. Most heartbreaking of all, there was a fully executed sales agreement for our lakeside cabin, a place filled with 40 years of family memories, with a closing date set for the following week. The betrayal was not a mistake. It was a calculated long-term campaign. I knew Daniel would return. Desperation is a relentless taskmaster. Through Richard, and with the full cooperation of the hospital administrator after we presented our initial evidence, we had a small, high-definition security camera installed in my room the next day. It was disguised within the housing of the smoke detector. Its lens pointed directly at my bed and the oxygen equipment. He came back 2 nights later, emboldened by what he thought was a successful first attempt. This time, he was more sophisticated. He first went to the heart monitor and with a quick, knowing flip of a switch, disabled the audible alarm. "No one to save you this time," he whispered to the quiet room. He turned to the oxygen tube. But this time, I was ready. As his fingers reached for the plastic connector, I opened my eyes and sat up straight in bed. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence like a gunshot. The transformation on his face was instantaneous and absolute. The mask of determination melted into pure, unadulterated terror. He froze, his hand hovering in midair, his eyes wide with the shock of a ghost rising from the grave. "I heard everything the other night," I continued, my gaze locked on his. "The debts, the forgeries, the plan to sell the cabin, how you thought Sarah would get over my murder." I pressed the silent alarm button Helen had secured to my bedsheet. The door flew open instantly. Richard and 2 burly hospital security officers filled the room. "It's over, Daniel," Richard said, holding up a tablet that showed the live feed from the camera. "We have it all. Every word, Every action. We played the recording back for him right there. We watched him disable the alarm, heard him mutter his deadly intention. The sight of his own crime unfolding on screen broke him. He collapsed into a chair, sobbing, a pathetic, broken figure pleading that it was all Lisa's idea, that he was forced into it. As if on cue, Lisa arrived, her heels clicking furiously down the hall, her voice shrill with fabricated outrage. "What is the meaning of this? How dare you harass my husband?" The evidence was presented to her. The video, the forged documents from Margaret's search, Helen's sworn statement. Her defiance crumbled into cold, silent fury. Richard formally presented them with a copy of the new will. "You have been completely disinherited," he informed Daniel, whose face went as white as the hospital sheets. "Your only inheritance will be a court date. You are no longer the son of Robert Miller. You are his attempted murderer. Today I am alive. I have made a full recovery, each breath a hard-won victory. Margaret and I made a decision. The business I built was tainted by the memory of that betrayal. We sold Miller Precision Manufacturing to a reputable conglomerate, with the stipulation that all employees be retained. The sale gave us freedom. We are now traveling the world, from the sun-drenched cliffs of Santorini to the bustling markets of Bangkok, reclaiming the joy that was almost stolen from us." Daniel and Lisa accepted a plea deal: attempted murder, forgery, and conspiracy. They are now serving lengthy sentences in a state penitentiary. The loss of a son is a profound, permanent scar on my soul, a hollow echo that will never fade. But I did not just lose a son, I exorcised a predator. In saving myself, I saved Margaret, I saved Sarah, and I salvaged the legacy of a lifetime of honest work. This experience taught me the most brutal and most valuable lesson of my life. Family is not a title bestowed by blood. It is a bond forged in the fires of loyalty, respect, and selfless love. It is found in the steadfastness of a wife like Margaret, the genuine care of a daughter like Sarah, the unwavering loyalty of a friend like Richard, and the professional integrity of a stranger like Helen. If this story of betrayal and resilience resonated with you, if it made you consider the true meaning of family, please like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more powerful narratives about life's most difficult truths. What would you have done if you were in my situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Is there a line that family should never cross? Let's have a conversation about it.